Hello, everybody. We'll give it about 30 more seconds, just let some folks start trickling in, and then we'll get started. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the Environmental Law Institute's webinar, Policy That Produces Progress, Model Ordinances, and Other Governance Tools to Reduce Food Waste. My name is Sarah Viken. I'm the Manager of Education here at ELI, and I want to thank all of you for joining us here today. And a special thank you to the Food Waste Prevention Week team for convening so many amazing folks over the course of this week who are doing such important work. It's really been great to see all of the activity this week. Today's program will run for about 50 minutes. We're saving time at the end for audience questions. So if you do have any questions throughout the program, please use Zoom's Q&A function, not the chat. It's open for any observations and comments. You can post resources, but please be aware that we will be pulling discussion questions from the Q&A box, and our panelists may not be monitoring the chat. Speaking of panelists, thank you to Darby, to Jesse, and to Leanne for taking the time to speak with us today, and to Linda, of course, for facilitating today's program as well. You can find links to everyone's full bios, as well as the presentations for today, and in a few days, the recording of the webinar, all on the event webpage. So we'll do some quick introductions, and then we'll get us started. So Darby Hoover will be up first. She's a Senior Resource Specialist of Environmental Health and Nature at NRDC, where she specializes on issues related to food waste reduction, composting, anaerobic digestion, plastics, zero waste, recycling, paper industry reform, and sustainable packaging. She creates strategies to improve the efficiency of the food system by preventing food waste, rescuing surplus food, and recycling food scraps. Previously, Darby worked with sports and entertainment organizations to help them develop greening initiatives and served as executive director of the Recycled Paper Coalition for 7 years. Next up, we'll have Jessie Sugarman. She's a policy analyst at the Environmental Law Institute, where she works on waste reduction and climate with a special focus on food waste in Nashville. In this role, she develops model policies to help municipalities and advocates advance food waste reduction and promote sustainability at the local government level. Jessie's previous work at ELI spanned a number of topics, things including oceans, digital technology, and indoor air quality. Then we'll turn it over to Leanne Edwards, who works at as the program director of Project Green Fork, a program of Clean Memphis that aims to develop a sustainable food system for all Memphians by reducing food waste, connecting local partners, and encouraging green dining practices. Leanne has spent over 15 years in the food service industry, including work as a professional chef in a locally owned farm-to-table restaurants, in healthcare food service, and in child nutrition. As the culinary specialist for one of the largest food districts in the US, Leanne spent a great deal of time educating staff and students on food as a resource. Last but not least, we have Linda Bregan, our moderator for today. She's a senior attorney with the Environmental Law Institute, where she directs the Center for State and Local Governments and co-directs ELI's Food Waste Initiative. Linda is a senior strategic advisor to the Nashville Food Waste Initiative and previously served as co-chair of Nashville Mayor's Sustainability Advisory Committee. Linda also previously served as an associate director in the White House Office on Environmental Policy, as counsel to a congressional subcommittee, as a special assistant in the Office of Enforcement at the US EPA, and as counsel to a large law firm. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Linda, to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah, for your help in organizing this panel, and also to our ELI colleague, Madison Calhoun. So delighted to be here today. ELI is just so glad to be a sponsor of and participating in Food Waste Prevention Week. And as Sarah said, it's just so nice to see how much this week has sort of grown in profile and the incredible number of events and webinars. So it's just great to be a part of this. As Sarah said, the plan for today is to hear from Darby Hoover with NRDC first, and she's going to do a little Food Waste 101 for those new to the issue or anyone who needs a refresher, and talk about NRDC's work and how the model ordinances that we collaborate on fit into NRDC's work. And then Jatsy and I are going to talk about ELI's work on food waste. And we're going to walk through the models that we've done to date and also give you a little preview of what's on the horizon. And then Leanne is going to sort of ground us in reality and talk about the work that she's doing in Memphis on food waste reduction. And as Sarah said, please use the Q&A box for questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Don't use the chat for the questions, use the question box. So I'm going to hand it over now to truly one of the all-time leaders on helping our country reduce its food waste, Darby Hoover with NRDC.
Thank you very much, Linda, and thanks so much for inviting me to be on this webinar. I'm really excited to talk about this great work that we're all doing together. Like Linda said, I'm going to do a quick 101 here. So every year in the US, we let almost 40% of our food supply go unsold or uneaten. A small portion of this is donated to those in need. Food scraps are some are recycled, but the vast majority of this wasted food goes straight to a landfill or an incinerator or down the drain, or it's left in fields to rot. Meanwhile, over 1 in 10 Americans are food insecure. So this is something that seems inherently wrong to many of us and something that we have been actively searching for solutions for. When we waste food, we also waste all the water, energy, labor, agricultural chemicals, other resources that go into growing the food, harvesting the food, manufacturing, transporting, cooling, preparing food. And most of this wasted food ends up in landfills, where it generates methane, which is a powerful greenhouse gas that is up to 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Indeed, wasted food is responsible for at least 6% of all US greenhouse gas emissions, and for 58% of all fugitive landfill methane emissions. The impacts of food waste on our climate, environment, and biodiversity are enormous. If all of our country's wasted food was grown in one place, this mega farm would cover roughly 80 million acres, which is over 3/4 the size of the state of California. Growing the food on this wasteful farm would consume all of the water that's used in California and Idaho combined. This farm would harvest enough food to fill a 40-ton tractor every 20 seconds. Many of those trailers would travel thousands of miles, distributing food to be kept cold in refrigerators and grocery stores for weeks. But instead of being purchased, prepared, and eaten, this perfectly good food would be loaded onto another line of trucks and carted off to a landfill, where it would emit a harmful stream of greenhouse gases as it decomposes. And most landfills and incinerators in this country are located in BIPOC communities. So these are huge health and equity impacts, huge climate and environmental impacts. Food security is rising in the US. We do have the opportunity to rescue and redistribute some of the wholesome food and to implement other solutions to keep good food and inedible food scraps from ending up in landfills and incinerators. NRDC has been working on food waste reduction since 2012, when we helped spark a national dialogue about the alarming amount of food that goes to waste in our country by releasing a report called Wasted: How America is Losing Up to 40% of its food from farm to fork to landfill. Currently, we do federal advocacy, state advocacy. We do a lot of work with cities, which we broadly call our Food Matters Project, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. And we also work at the household level, including through our Food Waste Awareness Project, which is called Save the Food for Consumers. So we see this work as mutually reinforcing on these 3 levels: federal, state, and local. The federal work helps us pass food waste policies and implement things like grant programs that flow to cities and states. States pass food waste policies like organic waste bans that have impacts at the local level and can influence action federally. And at the local level, we work across city and county governments with local stakeholders to help them implement food waste policies and programs that create on-the-ground change and serve as case studies to influence action at the state and federal level. And all of this is within the EPA's recently developed wasted food scale, replacing its former food recovery hierarchy. As you can see with this scale, the far left green is the preferred option for how to address the impacts from wasted food. The far right red is the least helpful option and the one to most avoid. So focusing as far left on the scale as possible, with prevention first, then donation or upcycling, then feeding animals, then composting. All of that brings greater environmental, climate, economic, and social benefits. This is all also in service of a national goal that we have to reduce food waste 50% by 2030. In 2015, USDA and EPA committed to this reduction, which is in alignment with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Now, why does NRDC work with cities? Well, we think cities are particularly powerful change agents for food waste reduction. In the US, cities are the ones primarily responsible for funding and setting up waste management infrastructure. Working on food waste can mean that cities manage less waste, thereby paying less money. They can potentially have more food relief to help fill meal gaps, and they can get closer to achieving climate and sustainability goals. Our goals in working with cities include this real on-the-ground change that can happen, but also inspiring cities to influence one another, to influence companies, to influence consumers, and to support cities to be leaders, including at the state and national level. We started our Food Matters initiative working with cities in Nashville in 2015 and have since grown to provide technical assistance currently to 22 cities. The map, Baltimore and Philadelphia fell off the map for some reason, so they're in the little slug below, mentioning that they're part of this too. These cities on things like policy and program implementation, food waste action planning, etc. And we also have a goal of building strong local partnerships. So we know that no work can be done in cities without local partners. And in fact, many of our partners are nonprofit organizations like Clean Memphis and Project Green Fork that are doing some real powerful work on the ground and influencing both policy and program at the city government level. So many of the local partners are already doing the work and need to be brought into the umbrella of working on this work locally. So from the outset with our partnerships, we set out to figure out who some of these partners are, how we can help cities work with and support them. And we try to cement relationships with cities so that there's continued work once our NRDC partnership is over. We also have a Food Matters network where we can reach a broader number of cities, where we foster peer learning, do webinars, trainings, et cetera, only one, et cetera. And one of our goals is to grow that network even more this year and expand the opportunities that we're giving to cities through the network. And another big part of Food Matters project is the templatized tools that we've created for cities to use. The tools include guides that detail how we executed food waste reduction strategies in cities, and templates that can easily be adapted to a city's need. And speaking of templates, one critical component of our tools for cities are our model policies. These are plug and play policies that cities can use, and it cuts out the massive amount of effort that cities need to invest into developing good policy. We are really starting to see motivation from these cities that we work with and other cities to pass municipal policies, in many cases because they're better equipped to do so because of actions taking place at the state or federal levels, actions that local partners help to influence, like making more federal dollars available to cities to implement food waste reduction strategies. Consider this slide a sneak peek. I'm now going to turn it over to ELI to tell you more about some of the model policies that we've created to date.
Great. Thank you so much, Darby. And, our collaboration with NRDC on model governance tools has truly been some of my favorite work over the course of my career, and not just because of the importance of the food waste issue or of getting to work with you, Darby, but because it has the potential to really have long-term systemic impact. But before I get to all that, I want to start by quickly introducing our organization, the Environmental Law Institute, and our food waste team. So Sarah, if you could change the slide. So ELI is a nonpartisan, non-advocacy nonprofit based in DC, and that's a lot of nons, but we do a lot, and we serve a whole variety of roles. Basically, we're a research, publications, convening, policy analysis, and training center. And as you can see, we work on a wide range of environmental issues, domestic and international. And if you can go to the next slide, Sarah. So our food waste initiative focuses on preventing food waste, increasing surplus food donation, and recycling food scraps. So we work on all aspects of the food waste reduction. Much of our work does focus in Nashville, Tennessee, where I'm based, and where we first got involved in the food waste issue by being fortunate enough to coordinate NRDC's pilot project on food waste that I think Darby mentioned. And we now, along with NRDC, serve as senior advisors to what's called the Nashville Food Waste Initiative, which is a project now of the Urban Green Lab, which is a terrific local NGO that teaches Nashvillians how to live sustainably. Our food waste work currently focuses in particular on convenings and on research and policy analysis and the development of tools such as the model policies we're here to talk about today. This is our team. It includes my co-director, Carol Jones, a talented economist, Jesse, our policy analyst, and several young and frankly quite brilliant research associates. So if you go to the next slide. So our work with NRDC on models, first and foremost, is intended to provide municipalities, and let me just say, I use municipalities to refer to all types of local governments. It's just municipality is a shorthand. But our work is intended to provide municipalities and community groups with tools that, as Darby said, reduce the time and resources associated with taking action to address food waste. And we started this work in part because as we were working with cities, we realized that so many cities, especially small and mid-sized cities, staff are overloaded and under-resourced. It isn't that local governments aren't interested in doing something to reduce food waste, they just literally don't have the capacity. So we try to make it easier by doing the research and drafting. I mean, you know, as Darby said, frankly, it takes a lot of time to do research, especially if you're doing a lot of interviews, and takes time to figure out what municipalities across the country are doing, what's working, what isn't working, and then ultimately to identify best practices for reducing food waste. And also, it takes time to think in new ways based on the lessons learned to address food waste, approaches that may not have even been tried yet. So I know I did not have the luxury of time to conduct research or frankly, even to think creatively. When I was in government, I was just sort of reacting to everything that was coming my way. And, you know, it also takes a lot of time to draft laws and policies and executive orders. But backing up for a minute, so like, why this approach? You know, why are we focused on model policies and ordinances? So when you think about it, when a governmental entity makes a statement, let's say in the form of a city council resolution setting a food waste reduction goal, for example, it is signaling to the community that they have determined that this issue is important and that it deserves attention. And when a mayor issues an executive order that requires the city's own operations to reduce food waste, let's say by composting food scraps in municipal buildings, the city's not only example for its employees, their families, and the businesses in the community, who then in turn may take action to address food waste. And when a municipal government requires private entities to take action, let's say by requiring people to put their food scraps, you know, in containers to be picked up curbside, it's routinizing a practice, right? That's likely to be in effect for quite some time. It's systemic change. It's not one-off short-term change. It's weaving into the fabric of government operations or private sector practices, measures that reduce food waste on a large scale and hopefully for a long period of time. So that's why we think these governance tools are an important part of like the puzzle, an important piece of the puzzle for addressing food waste. But I do want to emphasize that it really varies a lot from municipality to municipality in terms of what works, right? And what might work in one municipality just might not be the right approach in another. And that's why when we do our research, we always look at a wide range of cities. We look at cities in every region of the country. We look at cities of varying sizes and with varying resources. And that's why we also provide information in our models on ways that municipalities can tailor any of the models to their own situation based on factors such as their available resources or what their stakeholders are interested in. There are tens of thousands of local governments in our country. They vary in terms of how they're organized from a governance perspective, how much authority they have from their states to take food waste action, even the governance tools they use, right? So a legislative action in one city might be called an ordinance, but it's called a bylaw in another. So all of this is just to say that we provide a model, but we recognize that we need to make it easy for municipalities and other local governments to adopt the model to their circumstances. And we do this by not only providing a clean off the shelf model that could be enacted by a city council sort of as is with no changes, but we also provide a version with commentaries and a background memo to give municipalities the information they need to modify the model in a way that works best for them. So you're going to hear more, or Jesse's actually going to show you what this looks like. If you go to the next slide, this is a list of our models that we've done with NRDC to date. They're all linked, so when the slides are posted, you can just click on and access directly. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jesse Sugarman, to give you an overview of each model. Jesse?
Thank you, Linda. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie, and as Linda said, I'm going to provide an overview of 4 of these our model policies, both what they say substantively and some of the supporting materials that Linda mentioned. So Sarah, if you could go to the next slide, please. First up is our model compost procurement policy. It requires a municipality to purchase and use compost in things like landscaping and construction, and thereby, promoting all the wonderful benefits that compost provides. And for those who might not be familiar, some of those benefits are, there's the diversion of food waste from landfill or incinerator, as well as soil rejuvenation, carbon sequestration, reduced reliance on irrigation and on chemical fertilizers, just to name a few. So this procurement policy helps to promote those benefits and to build up the local market for compost. Next, please, Sarah. Our next model requires large food waste generators to report the amounts of food waste that they throw away, of surplus food that they donate, and of surplus food scraps that they recycle. It covers entities that generate 2 tons per week or more of food waste, which is a lot. As written, this is likely to apply to big grocery stores and the like, not small shops, certainly not households. And the model gets into record keeping requirements, methods for quantifying this food waste, and other details, but this reporting requirement is really at the heart of it. And the goal here is threefold. First, to provide data which can inform waste management operations and future municipal policies. Second, to increase awareness about the problem of food waste, as Linda mentioned, sort of signaling that this is important. And ultimately, the goal is to lead to reductions in landfilling and incineration of food waste. Next, please, Sarah. Next up is our municipal leadership model, also called our lead by example or LBE model. Under this policy, the municipality can institute a wide variety of programs, actions, and internal policies to reduce food waste. In a direct sense, the goal is to reduce food waste throughout municipal operations. But this policy also aims, again, to raise awareness, to highlight to businesses, residents, and other private entities the importance of reducing food waste, and to demonstrate food waste reduction measures that those entities may voluntarily replicate, because that's what leading by example is all about. The LBE model includes a wide variety of measures that range tremendously in terms of how sort of easy or hard they are to implement in terms of resources and or political will. For example, it may not be a huge lift to just set a food waste reduction target. Meeting it may be a different story, but I'm talking about officially setting the target as compared to, say, hiring a new person to serve as a food waste reduction coordinator for the municipality. And which is to say, when you consider budget, staffing, time, priorities, other resources and circumstances, you can choose the measures from the model that work for your local context and your current moment. And as Linda has said, that's really something we try to make sure is true for all of these models. And next, please, Sarah. The fourth of the published models is pay as you throw. Pay as you throw is a municipal solid waste collection system in which households are charged based on the amount of trash that they're disposing of, and charged at a higher rate for trash than for recyclables and compostables. So currently, many households pay a flat fee for trash, regardless of how much they throw out. So they have no financial incentive to reduce their waste. Pay as you throw, on the other hand, is in line with payment structures for other utilities like water and electricity, where households are typically billed based on how much they use. And there are 2 main goals here with pay as you throw. We want to incentivize people to generate less waste and to recycle and compost more. And we also want to establish a payment scheme that's more transparent, more efficient, more fair, rather than, say, charging a flat fee or covering the cost of trash collection in property taxes where it's kind of hidden. And I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on any of these models for now, but the last thing I'll note on pay as you throw is that this model ordinance covers 3 different hauling scenarios that require 3 different legal mechanisms. So they're municipally operated haulers, licensed private haulers, and private haulers operating under contract. Because, as is a common theme here today, local circumstances vary. We want these models to be useful to as many municipalities as possible. So thank you for sticking with me through those 4 model policies. Of course, each one has a lot of detail to it. So again, we're happy to answer questions later. I hope that overview was helpful. And Sarah, if you could go to the next slide, please. Before I pass it back to Linda, I want to talk a little bit about those supporting materials that she had mentioned. So first up, the commentaries. As Linda said, for each of our model policies, we'll publish a clean off-the-shelf version, and then we'll publish a version with commentaries in the footnotes. I know there's a lot of tiny text on the screen. You certainly do not need to read it all, but just wanted to show you the general idea. Up top, we have a snippet from one of our models. This is basically one provision from the mandatory reporting model talking about which entities are covered and therefore have to report their food waste generation. The commentaries are below, and in this case, the first one offers citations and examples saying, hey, the language we use here pulls from a bunch of different existing laws, including this one and that one, if you'd like to look at them yourself. Next, we have a commentary saying, hey, here are some tools that can help with the implementation of this provision by helping to calculate, who meets that 2 ton per week threshold and is therefore covered by this ordinance. And then third and final in this example is a footnote saying, here's why we wrote this the way we did, but another option is to do X or Y or Z instead. And again, our goal with all of these commentaries is to help provide additional information, examples, alternative options, to help people tailor the model to their local circumstances. Next slide, please, Sarah. Similarly, most of our models are accompanied by a background memo that provides context, gives an overview of the legal language that you'll find in the model policy itself, explains that model and methodology, and includes any other information that we think is important for you to know as you work to tailor and adopt the model. And next, please. We also put together presentations to accompany each model. This was actually at the suggestion of Leanne's colleagues in Memphis. So thank you, Leanne and team, who has said that slides would help them explain and pitch the policy to other stakeholders and decision makers. And I promise those slides are not nearly as dense as some of the ones that I have presented to you today. And last, I just want to say we are currently working on several more model policies, including right now working on zoning for community, so sort of small scale, locally focused composting operations. But we're always thinking about future models. If you have ideas, if there's model language that would be helpful to you or your city, please don't hesitate to let us know. And with that, I will pass it back to Linda.
Great, thank you so much. And let me just pause for a moment and remind everyone to put questions in the question box. We have a couple of great questions already, but we could use a few more, so don't hesitate. So I just want to close this part out by saying that in addition to the models we just outlined, that Jesse just outlined, ELI also produces a range of other resources for local governments and communities. And again, these are all intended to build capacity, right? To make it easier for local governments and stakeholders to take action to reduce food waste. So for example, our toolkit on incorporating food waste and climate action plans includes literally dozens of options for measures that a municipality could include in its CAP, as we call it, climate action plan, always with links to more information about each action and the cities that are already implementing it, because we have found, not surprisingly, that cities like to talk to other cities that are similarly situated. We also have a toolkit, for example, on implementing share tables in municipal schools that we developed with our partners in Tennessee. It outlines step-by-step actions for establishing share tables, as well as background information and some templates, including a standard operating procedures template. So I encourage you to look at ELI's Food Waste Initiative website. It includes all of these resources. And now I want to hand it over to Leanne Edwards from Clean Memphis to tell us about how this all plays out at the city level. Leanne?
Thank you, Linda. I'm really thrilled to be with you today. Like Sarah said, I'm Leanne Edwards. I'm the program director for Project Green Fork, which is the food waste reduction program underneath Clean Memphis. Clean Memphis is fundamentally an environmental education organization, but our food waste work has continued to grow over the past several years. And I can absolutely attest to the usefulness of the toolkits and the model policies that have been discussed today. We've used several of them. Specifically today, I'll be discussing our efforts here in Memphis to introduce and implement the compost procurement policy using the model policy that we all just discussed. So Sarah, we can move forward. To work towards the adoption of a compost procurement policy in Memphis, Clean Memphis began with a pitch to pilot the procurement of compost for a city project. So in 2022, we led a meeting with city and county partners to discuss the opportunity. And that discussion included a lot of what we've already talked about, completing a pilot project that could make the case for the adoption of that compost procurement policy that would encourage municipalities to purchase and use finished product compost in their public projects. The key partners in our discussion were from a variety of divisions that we gathered to discuss the plan, and that included solid waste, planning and development, the Office of Sustainability and Resilience, Public Works, and engineering. And we were able to bring all these people to the table by finding an early adopter in solid waste. And that person really helped us to bring everyone else together. Early adopters are key. We can move forward. As a means of connection, Clean Memphis referenced existing objectives in our city's climate action plan and in Memphis 3.0, which is our comprehensive planning guide that we're using for the next 20 years, that linked compost procurement with priorities that were already in place. So that's key to when you're introducing a plan like this, figure out how it fits with what the city's already trying to do and help them solve their problems. So examples from Memphis 3.0 directly related to compost production and procurement include top line goal of expanding sustainable approaches to material and waste management and reuse. And then more specifically, a long-term waste management plan that supports a vision of zero waste and to increase the city's capacity to divert and process food, yard, and wood waste for productive uses. Additionally, the climate action plan seeks creative uses for products that would otherwise be landfilled. Next slide, please. So how do you bring multiple divisions of government on board with compost procurement? We really leaned on these documents from Compost Research and Education Foundation. They served as a guide on how the use of compost might solve issues that the divisions were running into in their current projects. So much like tying into the city's 3.0 plan, this is moving down even further. How do we tie into solving these problems? These are just a few examples of the documents that you can find on compostfoundation.org. Today, I'm highlighting landscape gardens, turf maintenance, and erosion control blanket. But there are documents just like this to address row crop production, topsoil manufacturing, upgrading marginal soils, and many others that you can pull from for whatever you need. They very thoroughly explore the description of the work, the key benefits of using compost, return on the investment, and construction requirements. And feedback from the group that we met with showed that often the contractors they work with are completely unaware of this information. So these guys are also an educational tool for them. Next slide, please. So out of several possible projects, from construction to landscaping to roads and highways, the group narrowed down their options and ultimately selected landscaping at a city park to implement the pilot. And the pilot was completed during the park's landscaping in 2023. Next slide. While the completion of this initial pilot really marked positive steps towards future projects, there are always wins and challenges when you're working on things like this. For the wins, and there were several, it really fostered a relationship between us and our local government. And the model policy that we've been discussing, it gave us this plug and play guide. We used a slide deck, and it helped us to understand how to approach the process. And it really helped the city to understand how it could be put into practice relatively easily. This process gave Clean Memphis an opportunity to connect the work that we do every day in environmental education and in advocacy with city and county sustainability priorities so that we could become the go-to organization for outreach. And it also allowed us to create a replicable process for future compost procurement. And then on to the challenges, because there are always challenges when you're implementing a pilot. Changes in leadership can make things difficult. Changes within the city parks leadership in this project hindered our ability to collect data. A change in the mayor's office, which we had this year, can be a barrier to continuity. So with a new mayor, we're already working to rebuild that relationship and move on from where we started. Local procurement, which is an important part of the equation, can also present challenges. Is there enough supply available to complete the project that you're working on? How does the supplier package their compost? And the packaging thing may seem really minor, but in Memphis, the way our local compost was packaged was an issue to complete the job. And in fact, the city considered it such a hindrance that they purchased regionally instead of locally. And hopefully this is not something that everyone experiences, but we suddenly lost our commercial composter in 2023. As you can imagine, that halted a lot of our forward progress. But we really still feel positive, and I think there's a good reason to do so. Next slide, please. So we have some exciting next steps starting right now. So Memphis will be undergoing a waste characterization study this year, and that, along with continued updates to the climate action plan, really give Clean Memphis an opportunity to make recommendations and offer support as the city's moving through this process. Solid Waste is finalizing a contract to begin local compost production once again. So we are really celebrating that here in Memphis. And we're continuing to advocate. So just yesterday, we had a meeting with our new mayor's team to re-engage on the compost procurement policy. And we were also able to introduce that lead by example policy. So we're very excited for where that's going to go as well. We have plans to reconvene the division leadership to identify our next opportunity for compost procurement for use in a city project. And we're creating a model to better define the data collection process. Fix those problems that you found in the pilot, right? So we're going to assign a project champion through Clean Memphis to assist in that data collection and really to lead the reporting on the successes and the opportunities that we can use in the next project. We do believe these steps are a foundation for a successful new compost procurement project and eventually the implementation of the compost procurement policy here in Memphis. Next slide, please. And I just want to give a shameless plug here. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak to you on this. If you want to keep up with what's going on in Memphis, we would love to have you follow us on social media. Feel free to follow those QR codes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leanne. And, as I mentioned, I'm based in Nashville. So, I'm excited about what's happening in Memphis. We always have like a little element of competition, about, who's moving forward faster on these issues. And the work you all are doing is just really, really great. And I think what's also really important about what you said is that it is not just a linear straight line to getting policies adopted or ordinances adopted. It is a circuitous route, and you have to be patient and you have to persevere. And sometimes it happens unexpectedly, and sometimes you're just slogging it out for a long time. But at the end of the day, I obviously think it's an investment worth making. So we have some great questions, and I thought what I would do is I could start with one, and then I'll hand over to my co-panelists. But we had a great question about what you can do on college campuses, and I wanted to mention, and actually this gives me an idea, which is we just need to have a nice list, if there isn't a list out there already, of different things that students can do. But there are national organizations that have local chapters that students can start or participate in, for example, through the Food Recovery Network, which is about rescuing surplus food and getting it to food insecure members of the local community. There are things out there like apps that can be used to for students to come rescue food from special events that the university is sponsoring. I think, just watching what happens. I teach at Vanderbilt Law School, watching what's happened there with the administration, they really listen to students. And if students come to them and say, we really want you to do something about wasted food, they typically are quite responsive. And I've watched that at Vanderbilt, where they now compost from every dining facility. One of the really cool things they're doing, which you might want to consider talking with your college about, is Vanderbilt's giving real-time feedback to students in the dining hall. So when they put their tray back on the conveyor, it says, or it's actually, sorry, when they get their utensils, you want to do it beforehand. They say Vanderbilt students have thrown away this many pounds of food a day. And that typically would require university to have a software program that's helping them with food waste prevention. But there really are so many things that can be done, including like doing film showings. There's several great films out there about food waste. There's food insecurity on campus among students, and there are projects that can be done in that space as well. So I think there are a lot of things that can be done. I think the challenge usually is continuity, because you have champions and then they graduate, and then things can get slowed down a little bit. But I think there's just incredible opportunities for college students. And I want to ask if Leanne or Darby or Jesse wants to add anything.
Sure, I am going to just put a bunch of links in the chat. I think that's the easiest way to do this. One of them will be to what is now called CURC, and I think that used to stand for College and University Recycling, pick your C, Consortium Coalition. So that's an offshoot of, I believe, well, you know what? I'm going to put it in the chat and not screw up what I'm characterizing them as. And then there's a few other links of tips for colleges and universities. So I'll put those not in the Q&A, but in the chat so everybody can see them.
And anyone else want to jump in on that one? Okay, so we have a question about pay-as-you-throw model, and just generally speaking, how to address equity concerns. And this is something we take very seriously in every model we have. We have a section on equity, and I thought I would let, and I don't mean to say it's like sectioned off. It's a section that addresses how equity has to be considered throughout implementation and adoption of the models. But Jesse, do you want to say anything in particular, since you worked on this with respect to pay-as-you-throw?
Sure, yeah. So for pay-as-you-throw, this is another link we can put into the chat, but our model comes with a resources chart rather than a background memo on this one, because we said, there's so much out here already on pay-as-you-throw. The world does not need a memo from us. Let's just sort of sort through some of the information that's already there and present it. And that chart has various resources and then sort of checkboxes for different key topics that each resource does or doesn't address. And one of those key topic checkboxes is equity. So, looking through the resources chart, you can see there are resources out there that talk about some of these concerns. And then, in the model, there is a provision about sort of prevention of undue hardship and equity. And the commentaries there also have several, try to get into some more specifics, because it is often, a very local determination, sort of what structure works for a policy or not. But, so many policies are tools for the implementation is so much of the question, I guess. And so pay-as-you-throw can, as we said, result in much fairer prices, can be an opportunity for household cost savings. But we also want to make sure that there are, waivers and price reductions, various things available to help reduce the hardship for households that might otherwise be facing it.
Thanks, Jesse. So Leanne, there is a question about, well, what did happen to the commercial composting service in Memphis? And I think, we'd love to hear about that. And I think, Darby might also have some comments just about the whole challenge of developing robust food scrap recycling infrastructure as a general matter. But Leanne, if you wanted to start, that would be great.
Sure. They were also our hauler for residential and commercial, and it just was not a model that worked for them. They were a national company, and they just decided that it wasn't the right place. And so they did pull out of Memphis, but they're working in other places. We still have the facility, and so it's just a matter of bringing on the next person to manage, and that's in process. So we're very much looking forward to it, but it was a little bit sudden and sort of caused a scramble on our end. But things happen.
Yes, they do.
And I'll
Darby,
just, I'll just chime in that this is part of the reason that we are advocating for community composting is that many communities are reliant on one single organics recycling processor. And sometimes that's really about economic efficiency and can be a really positive thing that that this processing is happening at scale. On the other hand, if, as is almost inevitably the case for anyone handling any kind of discard, there may be the need to upgrade facilities. There may be the need to address an odor or litter complaint. If that facility needs to shut down temporarily or permanently, what happens to the food scraps in the interim? So having a more robust and diverse infrastructure for both hauling and processing of organics to recycle can help a community, and even smaller scale infrastructure like community composting, home composting, and education around those kinds of options can help take up a little bit of the slack if an industrial composting option falls through.
Thanks, Darby. And we did, it's Nashville based, but we did what we called a landscape analysis on how to basically increase, get a more robust food scrap recycling infrastructure in Nashville. And that might just be worth looking at because it sort of identifies the barriers and opportunities, you know, just the challenges. Okay, another question is, are there things that state governments can do to encourage or support municipalities in adopting some of these model policies? And yes, that is the answer, yes. I'll throw out something, and then I would actually love to hear, you know, Darby will have some thoughts on this, and Leanne, I'd just be curious, like, what would help you, you know, for our wonderful state of Tennessee to do? You know, I will say as a general matter, without getting too much into the law side of this, that local governments are creatures of the state in sort of the legal landscape, right? So they only have the authorities that are granted to them for the most part. It's a little nuanced, but that are granted to them by the state. So really, you know, keeping that big picture in mind, which is anything a state, you know, sanctions and encourages or requires cities to do, you know, is pretty much going to be within their purview. And so, you know, for example, in Tennessee, we have a great program that's run by the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, and it's mainly educational materials and sort of, you know, highlighting what municipalities are doing. But yes, there are so many things in the department of, for example, requiring or encouraging pay as you throw, and several of these other issues. But let me, Darby and Leanne, do you guys want to jump in on this? I'm mindful of time.
Just real quick, there can be state laws that can inhibit or provide advantages for local policy being passed. Some of those include things like, how do you permit organics recycling? Is community composting something that will hit a legal barrier at the state level? Are there funds for the work that you're trying to do locally? So there's a lot of ways that states can both help and hinder local policy.
And Linda, you mentioned TDEC. They're such a great partner, just really opening up that that voice, having food waste reduction as a goal that can be something that cities can latch on to as an important piece of it is a big deal for us.
Thank you. So I think we have time just to address one more question. And Darby, if there's one you particularly want to address, let me know. Otherwise, there's so many good questions. I'm just going to pluck one. Okay, so one question commented that when he proposes issues to the municipality, the first questions are regarding the economics. And does Environmental Law Institute have some of that type of analysis available? So let me just say that this is a challenge because so many food waste reduction measures can be implemented on, you know, a huge variance in terms of scale, right? And so we have not in our work sort of fixed a number. You know, for example, we have a toolkit on how to include food waste actions in your climate action plan. And when we went to try to put any kind of cost data or numbers on that, it just we had to make so many assumptions about the scale of implementation. So what we have done in some of our work, and we can also try to collect this in one place, is give you examples of cities that have put numbers on implementation costs and savings. In some cases, there are savings, but it's very hard to generalize. It sort of has to be by analogy, you know, sort of anecdotal. Darby, I don't know if you want to add to that, whether there's some good general resources.
Surprisingly, I do not.
And if Jesse or Leanne doesn't want to add to that, we are basically at time. And, you know, please feel free to reach out. The questions that we did not get to, you know, we're happy to answer if you just reach out to us via email. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thanks to our wonderful panelists, Darby Hoover, Leanne Edwards, and my colleague, Jesse Sugarman. As I said, you know, we'd love to hear from you. Jesse mentioned this. If there are new resources that you think would be useful, or new model governance tools that would be helpful in achieving our national food waste reduction goals, please let us know. And in the meantime, thank you for listening today. Please look for additional ELI webinars on our events page. Have a great rest of your day, and most importantly, have a great rest of Food Waste Prevention Week. Thanks.